What happens when a beloved British actor sits down for what should be a friendly morning chat show interview, only to face the most shocking ambush of his career? In just 42 seconds, one host's outrageous comment would destroy years of professional courtesy and send one of Britain's most respected actors storming off set in absolute fury. This is the story of how Carol McGiffin turned a simple promotional interview into television carnage that left viewers speechless, and Colin Firth questioning why he ever agreed to appear on Loose Women in the first place. The morning started like any other. Colin Firth, dressed impeccably in his signature dark suit, walked onto the Loose Women set with that familiar, gentle smile that had charmed audiences for decades. The panel sat ready, Carol McGiffin positioned at the far left, her arms crossed with that familiar smirk, Nadia Sawalha next to her looking genuinely excited to meet the actor, Ruth Langsford in the center chair, maintaining her professional presenter demeanor, and Jane Moore completing the lineup with her notepad ready for questions. "Welcome back to Loose Women," Ruth began warmly. "And we're absolutely thrilled to have Colin Firth with us today. Colin, thank you so much for joining us." Colin settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket slightly. "Thank you for having me, Ruth. It's lovely to be here." "Now, you're here to talk about your new film?" Nadia jumped in enthusiastically. "But I have to say, as someone who's watched your career for years, you've always chosen such interesting, complex roles. What draws you to these characters?" Colin's face lit up slightly, clearly comfortable with this type of question. "Well, I think what fascinates me about acting is the opportunity to explore different aspects of the human condition. Whether it's playing Mr. Darcy or more recent dramatic roles, I'm drawn to characters who have depth, who face real struggles and moral dilemmas." "That's such a thoughtful approach," Jane added, scribbling notes. "Your performances always feel so authentic, so lived in." Carol, who had remained silent up to this point, shifted in her chair. There was something about her posture, the way she was studying Colin, that suggested she had different plans for this interview. "Speaking of authentic," Carol interjected, her voice carrying an edge that immediately changed the atmosphere in the studio. "I have to ask about something that's been bothering me, Colin." Ruth glanced over at Carol with a slight frown, clearly not expecting this direction. "Carol, we discussed the interview topics beforehand." "Oh, come on, Ruth." Carol waved her hand dismissively. "Our viewers deserve honest conversation, not some sanitized promotional chat." Colin's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm sorry. What exactly has been bothering you?" Carol leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Well, it's just that you actors, especially you posh British types, you all pretend to be so noble and artistic, but really, you're just privileged men playing dress-up for millions of pounds?" The studio fell silent. Nadia's mouth actually dropped open. Jane stopped writing entirely. Ruth looked mortified. Colin blinked slowly, processing what he'd just heard. "I'm sorry. I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at." "Oh, I think you understand perfectly," Carol continued, emboldened by his polite response. "You went to fancy schools, had every advantage in life handed to you, and now you sit here talking about exploring the human condition like you've ever faced a real struggle in your entire pampered existence." Nadia tried to intervene. "Carol, I don't think this is fair." "Fair?" Carol snapped, turning on her colleague. "What's not fair is pretending these people are somehow special when they've never worked a real day in their lives." Colin's jaw tightened imperceptibly. His voice remained controlled, but there was steel underneath now. "I think you might be making some assumptions about my background and experiences that aren't accurate." Carol laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the studio. "Oh, please, spare us the humble act. You're Colin Firth. You've probably never even been on a bus." Ruth desperately tried to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps we could get back to talking about the film." No. Carol interrupted again, now fully committed to her attack. "I think our viewers would be much more interested in hearing Colin explain why he thinks he deserves the obscene amounts of money he gets paid for pretending to be other people." Colin's composure was beginning to crack. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the armrests of his chair, were now gripping them tightly. "I've never claimed to deserve anything more than anyone else. I work hard at my craft. I take it seriously." "Your craft?" Carol's voice dripped with disdain. "Listen to yourself. It's not brain surgery, Colin. You read lines someone else wrote while someone else points a camera at you. My hairdresser works harder than you do." Jane finally found her voice. "Carol, this is completely inappropriate. Colin is our guest." "And as our guest," Carol shot back, He should be prepared to answer real questions instead of having everyone fawn over him like he's royalty. Colin sat forward in his chair, his famous politeness finally beginning to crack. I came here to talk about a project I'm passionate about, not to be lectured about class warfare by someone who clearly has their mind made up about who I am without knowing anything about my actual life or background. Carol's eyes gleamed with satisfaction at getting a reaction. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. The real Colin Firth is starting to show through that polite facade. Nadia looked absolutely horrified. Carol, please, can we just move on? But Carol was nowhere near finished. She leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, preparing to deliver what she clearly thought would be her knockout blow. You know what I find most offensive about actors like you, Colin? Carol continued, her voice gaining momentum like a runaway train. You take roles away from working-class actors who actually understand struggle, who have lived real lives, and then you have the audacity to play characters who are supposed to represent ordinary people. Colin's face had gone very still, but his eyes were beginning to flash with genuine anger. That's an interesting perspective, Carol, but I think you're oversimplifying how casting actually works in this industry. Am I? Carol pressed on, clearly enjoying herself now. Because last time I checked, when directors want someone to play a struggling father or a man facing hardship, they don't go looking in the local job center. They call someone like you, someone who's never missed a meal or worried about paying rent. Ruth was frantically trying to signal to the production team, but Carol was in full flow now, unstoppable. And the worst part, Carol continued, is how you all pretended some sort of noble calling. At least footballers are honest about being overpaid entertainers. You lot act like you're performing some vital public service. Colin finally snapped forward in his chair, his voice rising for the first time. You know what, Carol? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am privileged. I'm privileged to work in a profession I love, with talented people who take their craft seriously. But what I find offensive is your assumption that privilege somehow disqualifies someone from telling meaningful stories. Nadia tried again to interject. Maybe we should all take a step back here. No, Colin said firmly, his politeness finally abandoned completely. I've listened politely to your attacks on my character, my background, and my profession, but I won't sit here and let you diminish the work that thousands of dedicated professionals put into creating something meaningful. Carol's smirk widened. Oh, here we go. The poor little rich boy is getting upset because someone dared to question his importance. Colin stood up slightly in his chair, his voice now carrying real heat. I'm upset because you invited me onto your show under false pretenses. I was told this would be a conversation about my work, not a platform for your personal resentments about class and success. Personal resentments? Carol laughed. I'm speaking for millions of people who are sick of being told that what you do matters more than what they do. Jane finally found the courage to challenge her colleague directly. Carol, you're being deliberately confrontational. This isn't what we discussed before the show. Oh, Jane, don't be so precious. Carol waved her off. Real television happens when someone asks the questions everyone else is too polite to ask. Colin's voice was now deadly quiet, more dangerous than when he'd been shouting. And what question exactly are you asking, Carol? Because so far, all I've heard are accusations and assumptions. Carol leaned forward, sensing victory. All right then, here's my question. How do you justify taking millions of pounds to play pretend while nurses and teachers struggle to pay their mortgages? The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Colin stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something approaching pity. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled but furious. That question reveals everything anyone needs to know about your understanding of how the world actually works. You seem to think that economics is a zero-sum game, that somehow my success takes something away from nurses and teachers. That's not how employment works, Carol. That's not how taxation works. That's not how anything works. Carol's confidence wavered slightly, but she pressed on. Don't lecture me about economics, Colin. I know what I see. What you see, Colin replied, his voice growing stronger, is what you choose to see. You see an easy target for your anger about inequality, which is a legitimate concern, but you've decided that attacking individual actors is somehow going to solve systemic problems. Ruth made one final attempt to salvage the interview. Perhaps we could discuss how the film industry contributes to the economy. No, Ruth, Colin said, never taking his eyes off Carol. I think Carol deserves a complete answer to her question. He turned fully toward Carol now, his entire body language shifting from defensive to offensive. You want to know how I justify my career? I don't have to. I work in a legal profession. I pay my taxes. I employ people. I support charities. And I try to choose projects that have something meaningful to say. But more importantly, Carol, I don't spend my time attacking people I've never met based on assumptions about their lives and backgrounds. Carol's face was beginning to flush. You think you're better than everyone else? No, Colin replied with devastating calm. But I'm certainly better than someone who uses their platform to bully guests who came here in good faith. The word bully hit Carol like a physical blow. Her face went from flushed to pale in seconds. Nadia gasped audibly. Jane dropped her pen. Ruth looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Carol's voice became shrill. How dare you call me a bully? I'm asking legitimate questions that represent the concerns of ordinary people. Colin laughed, but there was no humor in it. Ordinary people? Carol, you're sitting on national television, attacking someone's character and background. If that's not bullying, what would you call it? The silence that followed was deafening. Carol opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly struggling to find a response that would salvage her position. Finally, she found her voice, but it came out as a snarl. At least I'm honest about what I am. I don't pretend to be some sort of artist while I count my money. That was the moment everything changed. Colin's face went completely still, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet that everyone in the studio had to strain to hear him. Honest about what you are? He repeated slowly. Carol, what you are is someone who has just spent the last 10 minutes demonstrating exactly why civil discourse is dying in this country. Carol tried to interrupt, but Colin held up his hand with such authority that she actually stopped talking. You invited me here as a guest on your show. I came in good faith, prepared to have a pleasant conversation about my work. Instead, you've used this platform to launch personal attacks based on nothing but your own prejudices and resentments. His voice began to rise again, but this time it was controlled anger, focused and devastating. You've made assumptions about my background, my character, and my values without knowing anything about me. You've dismissed an entire profession as worthless. You've suggested that success itself is somehow immoral. And when I've tried to respond reasonably, you've doubled down on every attack. Nadia was sitting frozen, afraid to move. Jane had given up any pretense of taking notes. Ruth looked like she was calculating how quickly they could cut to a commercial break. Colin stood up from his chair, his full height imposing in the small studio space. But what's most disappointing, Carol, is that you seem to think this behavior represents some sort of moral courage. You think attacking a guest makes you a champion of ordinary people. It doesn't. It just makes you cruel. Carol's face was now bright red, her voice cracking as she tried to maintain her aggressive stance. I'm not cruel. I'm honest. Someone has to ask the difficult questions. Colin looked down at her with something approaching disgust. These aren't difficult questions, Carol. A difficult question would require thought, research, genuine curiosity about the subject. What you've done here is lazy, mean-spirited, and frankly embarrassing. He began moving toward the edge of the seating area, clearly preparing to leave. Where do you think you're going? Carol demanded, her voice now openly desperate. We're not finished here. Colin stopped and turned back to face her one final time. Yes, Carol, we absolutely are finished here. Ruth made one last attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Colin, please. I'm sure Carol didn't mean to. Oh, she meant every word, Colin said, his voice cutting through Ruth's diplomatic attempt. The question is whether you're going to hold her accountable for turning your show into a platform for personal attacks. Carol jumped up from her chair, her composure completely gone now. You can't just walk out. This is live television. Colin's response was delivered with the kind of devastating calm that only someone with decades of stage experience could manage. Carol, I've spent my entire career working with professionals. Directors, writers, other actors, crew members who understand that even when you disagree, you treat people with basic respect. What you've done here isn't professional disagreement. It's not even entertainment. It's just unpleasant. He picked up his jacket from the back of the guest chair with deliberate precision. I came here to talk about a project I believe in, created by talented people who worked incredibly hard to tell a meaningful story. Instead, I've been subjected to a lecture about class warfare from someone who apparently thinks hostility equals insight. Carol was now visibly shaking. Whether from anger or humiliation was impossible to tell. You think you're so much better than everyone else. Colin paused in putting on his jacket, fixing her with a stare that could have frozen water. Carol, I think I'm better than this conversation, and frankly, so should you. Jane finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Colin, I'm so sorry about this. He turned to her with the first genuine warmth he'd shown since Carol's attacks began. "Jane, you have nothing to apologize for. Neither do you, Nadia, or you, Ruth. This isn't on any of you." Nadia nodded gratefully, tears actually visible in her eyes. "We're mortified. This happened. Professional disagreement is fine," Colin said, adjusting his jacket collar with the kind of precise movement that suggested barely controlled fury. "Challenging questions are welcome, but what happened here was neither professional nor challenging. It was just ugly." Carol made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "So that's it? You're just going to run away because someone dared to question your precious career?" Colin stopped at the edge of the set and looked back at her with an expression of complete contempt. "I'm not running away from your questions, Carol. I'm walking away from your behavior." He turned to address the camera directly, his voice returning to the measured, articulate tone his fans knew so well. "To anyone watching who was hoping to hear about the film, I apologize, that didn't happen today. The cast and crew put tremendous effort into creating something worthwhile, and they deserve better representation than this." Then he looked back at Carol one final time. "And to anyone who thinks this kind of ambush interviewing represents good television or legitimate journalism, I'd suggest you reconsider what you actually accomplished here." With that, Colin Firth walked off the Loose Women set, leaving behind a panel in complete disarray, a host whose career credibility lay in ruins, and television footage that would become legendary for all the wrong reasons. Carol stood frozen in the aftermath, her face cycling through expressions of shock, anger, and dawning realization of what she'd just done to herself and her show. Ruth sat with her head in her hands. Nadia was openly crying. Jane was staring at her notepad as if it contained the answers to life's greatest mysteries. The studio fell into the kind of silence that only comes after complete and total professional catastrophe, broken only by the sound of Colin Firth's footsteps disappearing down the corridor, taking with him any possibility that this interview would be remembered as anything other than a masterclass in how not to treat a guest.